I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today on this day of reflection and shared experience that'll hopefully sort of create a model or an anchor for the types of conversations that ODLOS in particular, the Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services of the American Library Association encourages folks to do when reflecting on the National Day of Racial Healing. I hope everyone had a great weekend and celebrated the holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In service. Again, my name is Kevin Strowder. I'm the director of ALA's Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services. Prior to my time with the association, I spent a lot of time doing diversity work within the private sector and also within education in terms of supporting Chicago public school systems with building diverse pipelines for workforce development, for corporate social responsibility, and also simply building employee morale in relation to DEI efforts. So I wanted to share a bit of background on why we've come together today and what it means to essentially step into healing and reflection. I want to acknowledge that this is the 8th annual National Day of Racial Healing. This day of reflection is rooted and centered around truth, racial healing, and transformation practices, which is a political and cultural framework developed by Dr. Gail Christopher and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Their work in particular embraced more than 300 organizations in the academic, the artistic, civic, and faith communities. So the National Day of Racial Healing emphasizes the importance of engaging in new knowledge, perspectives, and communication with others in your communities, within the clear understanding that we know that racial healing is the core of racial equity, and you must heal in order to move the work ahead first. And that can take shape and form in many different ways. So today's experience is an opportunity to simply bring people together to inspire collective action and reflection towards creating a more just and equitable world. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about our panelists today. These are incredible folks who represent the various member leaders within the Office for Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services community. We are joined by Olivia Blake, she, her, who is a member of ALA's Social Responsibilities Roundtable Action Council and currently serves as the coordinator-elect. She also serves as a co-chair to the Connecticut Library Association's Legislative Committee. Welcome, Olivia. We also have Alanna Aiko Moore, she, her, who is the executive director of the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association and a past ALA Spectrum Scholar. Welcome, Alanna. We also have here with us Dr. Ray Pun, he, him, who is an academic and research librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education. Dr. Pun has served as president of the Asian Pacific American Libraries Association and the Chinese American Libraries Association. Welcome, Ray. And then we have Gwen Weaver, she, her, who has been a truth, racial healing, and transformation facilitator working independently for the past 5 years, serving as a co-practitioner and trainer for ALA and the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Gwen is also chair of the Committee on Literacy of the American Library Association. Thanks for being here with us, Gwen. Before we get into our agenda today, I want to share a few housekeeping rules. One, our hope here and our time together is to build community and share experiences. All of us enter this space with a unique perspective and outlook on what it means to truly heal, especially when it relates to racial equity. So please be mindful of what it means to respect someone else's lived experiences of all who join us today and the perspectives that we bring as individual people with our own outlook on what it means to truly heal around racial equity. Please note that the chat and Q&A functions are available for folks to use throughout the hour. We have dedicated time for Q&A at the end, so please feel free to get your questions into us as you may think of them. We want to hear your voices as well today. We also have captions enabled for this program and interpreter services within the webinar today. Should you need specific support around this, please chat directly with Hillary Pearson, who's also on the webinar today, and our program manager for accessibility services. Okay, thank you again and welcome. All right, so I'm going to first kick things off with a question to just get us started and thinking together about racial healing. So I like to begin with the question simply stating, what does racial healing look like to you? And I'm going to ask that of Olivia to kick us off.
Geez. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm feeling very humbled to be with you all. So what does racial healing look like to me? I have to say, and just to put this out there, as a white person in the room, I started thinking, oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't even be here, but I started thinking about this healing process and what racial healing can look like. And in the spirit of this conversation and this day, I think humility and listening and acknowledging my privilege and kind of asking who's not at the table, and really pushing to go beyond, I'm still learning to get into material change. Seeing who's already doing the work, trying to support that work rather than reinvent the wheel. And for white folks, I want to say, it may not be our fault necessarily the way that things are today, but it definitely is our responsibility to make things better. And the last thing, just to acknowledge that the healing process, I mean, if we're talking about healing, it can be hurt, it can hurt, it can be uncomfortable. We don't go into surgery or get stitches or something, expecting it to be a completely painless process. I mean, I guess that's what anesthesia is for. So not the greatest example, but it can be uncomfortable. And so sitting with that discomfort and acknowledging that and doing a lot of listening and reflection and being open to that conversation. I think that's a good start.
Thank you for that, Olivia. And, I appreciate you sharing that and kind of opening with a sense of humility. Having these types of conversations brings a level of vulnerability that can often feel tough. And it feels like you're settling in a space where you don't have the answers, but the main goal here is that you're putting yourself in the rooms where people are trying to find those answers and entering with that humility that most people have to enter with as well, regardless of where you come from, what lived experiences you have. We all have to step into it with some form of humility if we want, more folks to be a part of the movement. And how necessary it is. So I want to pass this question over to Ray as well to let us know what does it look like for you to step into racial healing?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thank you, Olivia, for sharing. So building upon what Olivia shared, I certainly believe that racial healing is listening, reflecting, and holding yourself accountable. But it also can mean actively observing as a way to disrupt the systems that we inhabit every day, so that are operating out of racism or the causes that racial harm has created. So we're thinking about policies, biases that we hold, assumptions that are happening, and our actions or inactions, and whether that can actually move the needle forward to come together and have really difficult conversations, but to understand that experiences from those who are experiencing racism, right? Our experiences, for example, my own experiences can be shared through storytelling and to disrupt the status quo and these not dominant narratives, and to find ways to counter them. It really means to be an ally and advocate as well, and to understand that there are these systems in place, these policies that are not favorable, not built for people of color, for example. And we need to find ways to disrupt that collectively. One person can't do that, obviously. So racial healing is really coming together to seek understanding, affirming identities, experiences, and not just simply finding ways to solve issues, right? But something that's transactional, but building those relationships to work together to address them. So I think it's important to confront these issues and not avoid or hide them. I don't think it really is a way to advance or support racial healing. So it's very complicated, but I'm honored to be in this panel with such great groups of speakers, and so I leave it here where I think it's important that we come together to talk about it. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Ray. And all of what you've shared in that, and speaking about the different isms we might have to address, or the various, institutional elements that are built within this country in particular, where race is sort of at the forefront in many ways, that then marginalize various groups and communities. You talked about storytelling. And I think that's a huge part of like what we step into today and telling our experiences, because if we don't get that out there, it's hard for us to change the narrative and to rewrite the rest of that story in a way that is supportive of everyone. And for those who are kind of like put at the borders of our country in ways that, continuously bring harm. So I'd like to now hear from Alanna. What does racial healing look like to you?
Thank you so much, Kevin. And also so excited to be here with all these amazing panelists. And thank you, ALA ODLOS, for the invitation to speak today. Both Ray and Olivia have said so many amazing things. And I think to follow up on what Ray said, we need to definitely acknowledge those individual and systemic racist structures, which kind of reinforce and expand the power of white people, and also acknowledge, past wrongs, as well as move forward with action towards things that are coming in the present. I love the concept of racial healing, because I do think as Black, Indigenous people of color, oftentimes we're so busy reacting to racial trauma and racial harm that we don't actually have the space or create the space to actually do that healing work. One of the ways that I think we could really focus on racial healing is to really address internalized racism, which are racist beliefs and ideas about ourselves that we internalize, and we kind of accept these negative societal stereotypes and beliefs into ourselves. And this is also a type of systemic oppression, right? But we often, as Black, Indigenous people of color, don't have the space to really pull that apart and heal from it, because we're dealing with racism as a public health crisis, right? We're dealing with like racial trauma that affects mental and physical well-being. So I think having the time and space to really work on internalized racism so that we can reject norms of white superiority and really take pride in our cultures, our traditions, and our identities is really an amazing way to heal and move forward. I also just want to echo what Olivia said, and that, it's not something that BIPOC can work on alone. Like everyone, including white folk, engage in this work of dismantling racism and creating community.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Alanna. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about internalized racism in a way that it's one of those things that's hard to address, because back to your point, we are, especially individuals of color, reacting, and we oftentimes don't lean into that internal reflection that's required for our reactions to turn into true responses to what's happening in the world with us. So I want to wrap this question up here with a thought from Gwen. What does it look like to you?
Well, to me, and I love what everyone else has said, to me, it's a long, slow, and frequently painful process. But again, because I'm kind of embedded in the truth, racial healing, transformation methodology, I believe that it's something that we can address, that we, and I say we, meaning everyone needs to address it in some way. I today actually was in another Day of Racial Healing event. And I'm smiling because one of the things about that event that was so fabulous was there were 3 police officers from a small town who are doing this work and who are doing some amazing work in ways that you don't expect the chief of police, his deputy, and one of the other officers to be sitting in a group like this talking. And to me, what that says is, yes, it's a long, slow, painful process, but we can actually make a difference when we all become actively engaged. So to me, racial healing is something that it's very much individualized in the sense that each one of us has to figure out what works for us. But we need to take advantage of whatever tools are out there, whatever methods and tools are out there to try to help. As Kevin mentioned, Gail, the woman who was one of the chief architects of the TRHT methodology. And the tagline that she has added to all of her work is that we are discovering our common humanity. And to me, it's really important for us to work towards treating everyone as a human being. And to me, that's how we move towards healing. I don't think that, at least in my lifetime, I will see total healing, but I've seen instances, and again, it's highly individualized. Sometimes it's individualized to a community, a specific community. And there's fabulous work going on around the country. Kevin, I don't want to talk too long, but there is a lot of really good work going on around the country in terms of healing communities, but you never hear about it. It won't make the news. Won't make the 6 o'clock news at all, but there's a lot of good stuff going on. And what we all need to do is find out about it, engage in it, and do more of it. And I think that would help. So I'm going to stop because I can preach for hours.
I love that. Thank you so much for that, Gwen. And I think you're right. There is a lot of great work happening in many places around the world. And I'd love to talk to you a bit more after this so that we can continue to have resources available to our community and the field through the ALA website or through our division websites as well to support folks who want to step into this work. Something you shared around individuals who showed up to these events that you wouldn't expect for them to be there. And with this long, slow process of what could be painful, it's not natural for folks to want to gravitate toward pain and to step into something that feels tough or hard to address. So this next question I have for the group is, what does it look like, or what do you think we need to truly foster these communities that then talk about this work? What truly brings them to the table? What brings them together, knowing that it's potentially painful? How do we do that? And I will ask Alanna to open with a response.
Thank you. I think it starts for me personally by kind of challenging my own privilege and unlearning it, as well as being active in interrupting and disrupting cycles of racism when I see it happening. Using my privilege to lift up others and really focusing attention on other people's voices and really highlighting authentic communication, building trust across difference. That being said, I think that really honoring intersectional identities is very important for that healing. None of us are just one-faceted. Many of us are multifaceted. So, you know, racial healing for a queer, trans, Asian person is going to look very different than racial healing for a straight, cis, Black man or someone with a different intersectional identity, right? We're all coming to the table with different experiences. So I think, again, coming back to that building trust and, you know, kind of that communication. And, you know, within that, also for myself personally, really creating solidarity, community, and relationships with other folks who often, you know, share those identities so that we can have conversations across differences and really build on our strengths.
Thank you for that, Alanna. And I really want to highlight the importance of intersectionality because even within specific cultural groups, so many identities exist, so many different, ways in which people tie themselves to race show up differently, even in what on the surface to many folks could be the same cultural group. I want to get your thoughts, Ray. How do you think it's best to bring people together to have these types of conversations for collective healing?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Alanna shared, really thinking about the intersectional lens and the identities and privilege, one's privilege. And so when we think about the communities, at least for this question in my context, so I serve graduate students who are training to be teachers and teacher educators, and I think about their experiences in the classroom and what they're doing in schools, and then the systemic issues happening. And so what we do at my institution is that we come together to have affinity group spaces, to have DEIB webinars, to have book club discussions. And so I'm one of the co-facilitators for many of these sessions. And what I do is we work together in a group to create opportunities to really talk about issues of systemic racism in education, how it impacts children and the school systems and so forth, and how it creates these issues and what to do about it. And so I think if there's something to think about, is something as tangible as what we're doing right now to day, how we have these conversations to not necessarily force people to talk and tell us about these issues, but really to open up to listen and to share and hear from different perspectives. Now, I mentioned affinity groups too, and I'm one of the co-facilitators for that for our students who identify as Asian American and Pacific Islander. And we have these conversations that help us understand the experiences that we may take as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And it might be different experiences amongst the groups there as well. So I think it's important to have these conversations in a way where people feel that they can share what's going on or to listen to different perspectives and really to foster that conversation. Now, with that being said about the communities at my workplace, there's also the library community, all of us here, right? And one thing I've been trying to do more is to have conversations, as Alanna pointed out, the internalized racism that happens. So we're thinking about a quote here that stood out to me by author Zora Neale Hurston, who quotes, all my skin folk ain't kinfolk. And so what that really means is that some people of color may be agents of white supremacy and may actively discriminate against people of their same racial group. And what does that look like? That means that we need to have conversations, and it's difficult because people's experiences, including my own, have gone through different perceptions that needs to be addressed and unlearned and so forth. So I think that helps us to have more conversations to for personal growth, but also to understand where we are today through racial healing. So I kind of end here with some of these examples that I've been thinking about and have been doing.
Thank you for that, Ray. A couple of things to highlight there in what you just shared that I think is important to remember is that when we talk about affinity groups, they can show up in so many different ways. They can be tied to race, but even within that, it talks about socioeconomic status. It talks about education. It talks about, LGBTQ plus or queer identities tied to all of those things too, that are then to some folks, the undertones of race, because that's easily received as an on the surface, identity marker in a way. And these other things that contribute to how one associates race is really important too. And something you shared in there that you briefly talked about is the work that you would do that helps young people and children talk about these things too. And there's that piece of like, in terms of intersectionality, there's also this intergenerational component that's huge too about how people associate themselves with race. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I want to ask Gwen, how do you bring folks together? You've been a facilitator and a trainer and done this for some years now. How do you bring folks to the table?
Well, again, everything is a context. Everything is contextual. So there's no, as with almost everything, there is no single answer from my perspective. Sometimes it starts with there's a community need, or it starts with a group of people who are trying to address a particular issue. but they need some way to come together to address that issue. It's funny you just mentioned the intergenerational thing. So again, I have to back up to my thing I was in this morning. So we're doing TRHT, actually introducing people to the truth, racial healing, and transformation, and the whole idea again is to like remove barriers, open conversation, et cetera, and also, I mean, part of the framework of TRHT is looking at law, economy, and separation, as well as storytelling and relationship building. Those are like the 5 pillars. And one of the folks in the room said, well, my generation, he's a millennial, he says, my generation doesn't recognize race in the same way that those baby boomers do. And immediately, I got my hackles up because I'm definitely a baby boomer. On the other hand, I'm also a TRHT facilitator, so I have to figure out how am I going to deal with this? So what I did raise my hand and I said, I said, one of the things that we are trying to do is to bring folks together and not separate them further. And we all have to be kind of conscious of that. And so I think in terms of getting people started, sometimes it might just be an incident like that says, I think we need further conversation that you can try to bring people together on. Sometimes it's, and Kevin, I'm sure you've had this in your experience too, and probably everybody has. Sometimes it's something that happens in the workplace and the organization needs some tools to be able to bring people together. Sometimes it's things like, again, the literacy work that I do locally. We work with it's an adult literacy program. And so we're working with adults from various unserved and underserved communities who need literacy skills. Sometimes it means that we need to talk with the community organizations, again, to find out how and where we can improve communication. And most of this, to me, a lot of this is really about, and somebody's already said this, it's about hearing and listening and about seeing yourself in someone else's shoes, basically. Being able to do that, the phrase walking in someone else's shoes, but seeing yourself in someone else's situation and understanding, again, where the similarities are as well as the differences. Learning from the differences and finding the similarities. And once again, I'm about to get on a soapbox, so I'm stopping.
Thank you, Gwen. You have so much great insight here and lots to offer, and I really appreciate that. I want to think about what you just said in terms of sometimes there's a conversation that gets us to the conversation. And that's really important when we talk about buy-in of those various communities and identities that need a specific type of attention or a specific voice that they need to resonate with or connect to before they step into this sort of collective healing process. And I want to bring us to a next question that also pairs with what we've just been talking about, and they get Olivia's response. So when we talk about bringing people to the table, in the field of librarianship, there's a lot of room for librarians, library folks, and the communities surrounding them to be an anchor in this type of work. How do you feel librarians and library folks can bring people together to have these types of discussions? What role do they play?
Thank you for that. Geez, so I'm a very firm believer that libraries are not neutral spaces. I mean, librarians, we have limited shelf space, we have limited time, limited, just limited resources. And so we have to curate our collections, right? We have to limit what we can do. So with that in mind, I think that what we have to do is look at the gaps in our understanding. No human is without bias, right? So as librarians, I think we really need to reflect on and own our biases in order to sort of course correct. It's been a really long time since my undergrad, but I think of reflexivity in social sciences, where basically looking at the researcher's own role in the creation of that research, like who they are, what their biases are, and so on. And I think that as librarians, we can really push the needle forward and build that community and encourage that healing process by looking at our own gaps and understanding and doing that course correction. But we can't really do that without being able to look inwards first and see what those gaps are.
Thank you for that, Olivia. And I think that's something to be said. Oftentimes we talk about this individual journey that people have to take in order to step into this healing process, what you need to do first in order to make yourself fully present. But then we also have to look at it at scale. What does it look like for an entire industry, an entire field, to then take this aerial view on something that's even larger than them within itself? And, potentially the way in which they're created is a direct result of that system too. How do you break away from that? So I'm curious to hear from Alanna, same question. How do librarians step into this, knowing their role as potentially an anchor for moving communities ahead in this work?
Yeah, 100% +1 to Olivia about not being a neutral space. I think, you had mentioned storytelling earlier, Kevin, as a powerful tool for social change. And I think that sharing and telling authentic and true narratives that reflect our communities, tell the truth about our histories, our struggle, and also our joys and liberation are a great way to really encourage community healing. There's so much, I think, of our stories and our experiences that are not known, that are hidden, that are invisible, that are buried. And so I think, libraries and librarians can really raise those up, engage in those narratives, so that we can learn about our own histories and empower our own communities, but also learn about the struggles of others so that we can build those bridges across difference.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that insight. And I'm trying to be mindful of time here, so I want to get a quick response from Ray as well about your thoughts on librarians stepping into this as leaders.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to also add that in addition to collections, programming, and how libraries are creating really important, safe and brave spaces to create that sense of belonging for the community to come together and to talk about these issues and have access to stories that are hidden, narratives that are obscured, that, as Alanna mentioned, there's so many ones that I've been finding out in the past 4 or 5 years that something I should have known as a history major or as someone who works with history, social studies teachers, and so forth, like the Los Angeles Chinese Massacre of 1871, the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, and American Indian boarding schools, right? These are things that should have been in our textbooks, should have been in libraries, right? So to really access and understand. But, in some ways they were left out of the curriculum, intentionally or in other fashion, right? And so I think there is opportunities for us to steward these conversations and stories to tell what has happened so we understand where we're going. And also, as Alanna mentioned, the joys as well and the transformative experiences that also need to be shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, Ray. And back to Alanna's point of storytelling just being powerful. But it depends on what type of power you're seeking or what type of power you're projecting. And in many ways, we talk about the hard stories to tell and why some of those might be censored in order to sort of, cater to a specific audience or to leave a bit of, to be frank, fluff around one's feelings and experiences that aren't truly the story that needs to be told. So it's the responsibility of these various cultures and groups to fill in the gaps, back to what Olivia said. What are the gaps in some of the stories too? So I want to wrap this question up with Gwen sharing, as librarians, what do we do? How do we step in as a field and community to to address this with our spaces, our resources, and those things.
Well, I think everybody's already hit any points that I might want to make on what libraries and librarians can do, because we are absolutely not neutral spaces, but we are absolutely, or at least I would hope, both public libraries and academic libraries, community colleges, whatever, we are a core community element for whatever, however we define community. And we should be and can be the source of true information, because truth, it's not just storytelling, but it's truth telling as well. And I think Ray was really hitting on it very, very well, but we need to be the source of the truth, real truth, not made up truth, and be able to share that with the communities that we serve. And again, some folks will find the truth painful. So we need to figure out some way to deliver it so that they can understand and accept that it is truth. But that's a big piece of doing the healing. As somebody else said, you don't just slap a Band-Aid on something, was it Olivia, you talked about not going into surgery and knowing that it's not going to be a fun thing. Yeah, the whole process is not a fun thing. But then, Alanna, as you said, there are positives that we can share as well. And I think we need to find that balance. And I think libraries and librarians in particular, because I think librarians are the smartest people in the world. Well, we are, because if we don't know the answer, we know how to find it. But I think part of what we have to do is to be able to help people find that balance between the good and the bad, to find the balance between the positive and the negative, and find the things that will make us heal. And again, I am a preacher's granddaughter, and so I tend to start preaching, so I have to stop.
Thank you, Gwen, as always. Yeah, finding that balance is great. And a lot of, excuse me, at the core of that is having the smaller conversations first. The ones that, and sometimes feel easy and then lead to something great, bigger. And that is the balance, is that you can't always sit in something that's really hard, or else you're going to refuse, to go back to it. So there are layers to it. And I think that's a good segue for me to just talk about this video that we'll share with the group or the participants here today, that speaks to what our panel has been discussing. So I want to thank you all for your thoughts and perspectives that sort of sparked this sort of insightful discussion so far. We're now going to just take a little bit of time to watch a video from the Race Unity project created by Baha'i Teachings. So in this video, there's a speaker who talks about race in her perspective, acknowledging privilege, as we've talked about, talking about race and intersectionality in various spaces. So we wanted to take this opportunity to just provide a bit of context on what this video is, thinking about race, privilege within your own communities and the communities that you operate in. So to help us get to that point, I want you to take a look at this video.
So I can't name any names, but I did have some close friends talk about, or just briefly hint at the fact that they knew that their ancestors were slave owners. And these Baha'is are of European descent. And I was really impressed with the fact that they actually knew that and actually said it. One of the things that I think is not quite present yet, although I think it's getting there, and I think this is outside of Baha'i context, but even within the Baha'i context or environment, we don't really hear white people talking about how slavery has negatively affected them. No one says that that is a problem. Or no one ever says the feeling of entitlement that I have about what I think I should have in my life is a direct result of slavery. And I don't know. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing. Like, no one ever really talks about that. And I think this is not a good thing. But I do believe that it's going to come around because it's a spiritual illness. We know that Baha'is know that racism is a spiritual illness. Baha'is know that racism is a spiritual illness. And if we acknowledge that, then I think that there are a lot of things that, in order to heal, people of European descent in this country will have to address their illnesses in a way that is not shameful. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I think shame is a part of what hinders us from talking about this. You know, I've been in a lot of environments, now that I think about it, where there are white Baha'is that are not ashamed of it, but they acknowledge. They're not afraid of all the emotions that come with talking about racism, and they're really committed. And they're constantly talking about it. You know, just recently I was invited to a family picnic, and I was the lightest skinned person there, and it was on the south side of Chicago, and it was really cool. And somehow we got to talking. I was with my friends' family members. I was with my friends' family members, and race came up in many parts of the conversations in different times. And I thought it was really sweet that one of the new friends I made there, she apologized. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that we're constantly talking about race." And I was thinking, oh my gosh, how many times have I said that to other people? Or I've had other people say to me, "Is that all you ever talk about?" And I said to this person, I said, "I didn't even really notice. I just thought we were just talking." And she said, "Oh, that's good. I just don't want you to feel like I'm always so heavy." And I said, "But how can you not? This is a heavy thing and it's everywhere. This is not something that you can like set aside and put out for only a sunny, happy day when you feel ready to talk about it." Although I think some people think that you can do that, but we can't. This is a topic that's omnipresent.
Yeah. Well, even in a video that's only a few minutes long, there's so much to unpack there. And I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to sort of share their perspective, because what was sort of the center point of all of that is community, talking about these different groups that this individual was in where race would come up, or they would have to offer their perspective or acknowledge that it was present in some way. So I'm curious to hear from our panelists, and I want to start with Olivia here, and thinking about, how does this show up in your everyday? Or if not your everyday, how does this just show up in your life where you have to be part of these conversations that may not be as structured as like what we're doing today?
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really powerful. The speaker in that video mentioned shame and mentioned this being like a spiritual illness. And I think that framing is really interesting. She said it's heavy and it's everywhere. You can't just set it aside, right? But I have to say that a lot of times, especially with my white colleagues, we don't talk about this. And I think ignoring the issue allows it to fester. But it's kind of what the speaker was saying about white people don't talk about the negatives of their ancestors having enslaved folks, and until we do talk about this openly and sort of get past that shame that's hindering us, you know, I think that's kind of where we have to go to encourage that healing process. I think I said towards the beginning that as white folks, it may not be our fault that things are this way, you know, or that our ancestors enslaved other humans. But it is our responsibility to do better and to make things better. And so the way this sort of shows up day to day, for me, you know, we kind of have to be really intentional about making the space to talk about these issues and to look mindfully at what we're doing that's maybe perpetuating these systemic issues and what we can do to make it better.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. This sort of responsibility that you talk about, something I found in my work with various groups and across the sectors is that they will want the why. Getting to the why of why am I responsible for this? That quote unquote, it's so long ago my ancestors did these things, or people I have no ties to did these things. But that responsibility of the now, talking about this sort of collective outlook on what it means. I have this quote in my email, and something I think reads true. It's from Bayard Rustin, which says, you have to join every movement for the freedom of people. And regardless of where you come from or what affinity group you might be a part of, if you want your affinity to succeed and do well, you'll need the support of others. So I want to ask this question to Ray. What does it look like to have these conversations in our day-to-day lives? And how do they show up for you?
Yeah, I'll say that for my own work as a teacher educator and education librarian, I use a lot of this example, Sylvia Duckworth's illustration on Wheel of Power and Privilege, and it really highlights a visual component of the center is power and what are the characteristics, and then the outer characteristics are the marginalized identities, and that includes areas in gender, race, language, socioeconomics, etc. And I show this in the beginning when we have our semester starting, because students have to write a positionality statement on what it means to be a teacher and how do we disrupt systems that create and perpetuate inequity. And a lot of them struggle. They have a hard time thinking about their own identities. And when we show this graphic, it gives them perspective to have that conversation, to understand that sometimes the systems benefit a particular group, right? And because it was designed and set up that way to give advantage to one group over the other, etc. So it helps us understand maybe issues in grading, issues in how we take attendance, how we do policies and programming, etc. So I think the conversations are there. People have to be willing to really engage and interrogate that conversation, but also do some work afterwards, meaning actually make some intentional changes, because you can talk all you want, right? And if it doesn't lead into a call to action, it actually becomes static, and things might just not become a liberation for all. So I do this honestly to really have that conversation so that it moves them to really feel compelled how they disrupt the system and ensure that there is no bias, but also ongoing conversations about their own identities in the teaching workforce. So I just wanted to share that, and maybe that might give some folks some ideas to think about too.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. The practical tools and resources for people to educate themselves and others is really important. Alanna, can we get your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I was thinking about how to answer this question, and my mind was going in 5 different ways. So obviously, my role as head of community engagement and inclusion at the University of California, San Diego, I think about it a lot because a large part of my job is working with students of color, students from the LGBT community on campus, to really create a sense of belonging in the library. And I think also doing a lot of diversity and inclusion trainings, I think about it a lot. But I think the thing that was most salient to me when I thought about that question about where does it come up day to day with me, it's in my home as a parent, right? I am a queer person of color, married to a trans person of color. We have 2 beautiful kids of color. And so we talk about it all the time. They go to a very diverse school. We go to a lot of social change events and rallies. So they ask questions like, what are we doing in this car procession, you know? And I say, you know, today we are honoring missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so we are going to be driving down this road for 2 hours with all these other people. And it is a point to have a conversation, right? Or why are we going to a Black Lives Matter event? And, you know, there are folks who, I'm in some different parenting groups, and folks will say, like, you know, at what age is it appropriate to start talking about race with my children? And I think the answer is like as early as possible. It's there, it's salient, it's not going anywhere, as the woman in the video said, and it's not something that I think they need to be protected from. You know, and I think especially for Black children and children, other children of color, like they're having those conversations at a very early age. And so, you know, we want to teach our kids about not only our own history, but other people's history, how to be an ally, and how to really disrupt and interrupt a lot of the things that are happening. And I truly believe the change is going to start with the young folk.
Thank you for that. I'm processing in real time, so I'm gonna get thoughts from Gwen as well, because that gave me a lot to ponder there, especially talking about what it looks like to have these lived experiences alongside people who are your family and children. Those very different types of learning experiences that are happening at the exact same time around the exact same topics. So Gwen, can I get your thoughts as well?
So then I will do a little storytelling about it in terms of friends, because it's also something that comes up with friends. And this one is two of my friends, and again, I'm old, so these are people with whom I've been friends for 50 years. And a few years ago, I was meeting one of the two lives in Chicago, one lives in New York. One is Black and one is white. I'm meeting the Black woman in New York. We're going to hang out. And I said, oh, since I'm going to be in New York, I'm going to have dinner with my buddy. And do you want to come? And she said, she's white, isn't she? Just like that. She's white, isn't she? And I said, yes, she is. She always has been for all the years I've known her. And I don't think she's going to change. So then she goes, this is my Black friend, says, I've never had a white friend. And I mean, in terms of friend, you know, she's had colleagues, she's worked with people. We all have people that we deal with. But in terms of a real friendship, she'd never had a friend who didn't look like her. So I said, does that mean you don't want to go to dinner? And she said, no, I want to meet her. If she's your friend, she must be cool. And I said, of course she is. But anyway, we went to dinner. The two of them, once I introduced them, started talking as if I weren't even there. And, you know, the kind of the moral of the story for me is it really comes down to the personalities frequently. You know, you have to work with people. In this case, these were two friends that I knew were going to get along just because I've known both of them. But you really do need to, when you're dealing with these issues, think about the people, think about the personalities, and again, find the balance in how you approach discussions of race with different people. And frequently, I know I sound kind of Zen-like in this, but frequently you really have to think about balance in everything.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you all for sharing this perspective and thoughts, whether it's having these conversations with a specific group of people or owning the responsibility that you're shaping the lives and experiences of someone else, like children, as you bring them along through this journey too, or if you're, you know, shaping the minds of individuals who are already under an institution and they're already practicing what it means to sort of take these resources and tools and have conversations in various groups within library spaces. And then back to the individual, having to own it and take a responsibility within yourself to step into this path. Everybody is on a different journey or a different spot on this journey, but, you know, like I said, in order to you have to join every other movement for the freedom of people, and we all have to get on at some point. So I wanted to be mindful of like time here, and I didn't see any questions in the chat yet, but if folks do have any questions for our panelists, please do put those in the chat. Okay, there is a question here from Gwen. Is I see your chair of the Durham Literacy Center when they were at the director of the Durham County Library 2006 to 2010. They volunteered there. It's nice to see you. Skip Ald, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing names wrong, but they want to just give you a shout out, Gwen, and say that they see you.
And thank you very much. And I want to connect with you somehow, Skip. We'll figure that out. But nice to know that you were part of our literacy center, and it's still going strong, just to let you know.
Wonderful. As we wait for more questions to come in, I just wanted to know if there were any other closing thoughts from our panelists before we move to a thank you on all that we've discussed today. And I know it's a lot, and I know we're all processing, but if there's anything else you'd all like to share. There's thanks in the chat for you all being here and sharing your perspective and thoughts as well. And I will go ahead and do the same. So I wanted to thank everyone again for participating in our National Day of Racial Healing and Reflection here. I want to give a huge thank you and round of applause to our incredible panelists. Thank you for offering your perspective, for being vulnerable, for sharing your lived experience, for also telling us what it means to step into this work from your point of view. And it's important to have this point of view and come together in moments like this. So I really do thank you. I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to our interpreters who helped with our accessibility for this event, making sure that folks everywhere were able to hear this conversation and had the opportunity to join. And finally, thank you to everyone who stepped into the webinar today and heard our panel discussion, who took the time to take one footstep forward on whatever place you are in this journey and in this work. So all of the ideas and perspectives here really got me to thinking. I'm so grateful for that. It's important to encourage healing as a first step into addressing some of the bigger issues around race and equity. So I think conversations like this, experiences like this really do help. Whether that be in your own homes and beyond that into your various affinity groups and communities. So thank you again also to just ALA, the American Library Association, for giving ODLOS the freedom to build experiences and events like this on things that we hold true to the core of our mission. So I want to say thank you all again, and everyone have a wonderful evening.